Welcome to Bromley Experts by Experience Hustings event. So Bromley Experts by Experience are a deaf and disabled user-led organisation, and we wanted this event to be disabled people focused. So all of the questions that will be asked today will be around deaf and disabled people issues. Okay, so I want to thank all of the Experts by Experience staff, the team who have made this event possible today. A special thank you goes out to the campaigns officer, Rona Topaz, and the Youth Transition Project leader, Kaylee Parkinson Scathelberry. I hope I pronounced your name right. And we also want to thank our funders, Trust for London, for making this event possible. Right, so my name is Justine Jones, and I'm a disabled resident in Bromley. I'm also a campaigner, and I co-chair Inclusion London. I'm going to be co-chairing this event with my co-chair, Phoenix. So I'm going to hand over to Phoenix themselves.
Phoenix, person also part of the Youth Transition Project forum. That's it. I don't have much to say really. That's who I am.
Thank you, Phoenix. So first of all, we're going to read through the ground rules and some housekeeping. So if I get up ground rules. So please mute yourself when you're not talking. When speaking, speak slowly and clearly, allowing time for the captioner and British Sign Language interpreter to catch up. Candidates must stick within their allotted times. There will be a 30-second warning if we feel that you're not wrapping up, and you'll be asked to stop. If you're going over that time, speakers who are reading out questions must stick to the submitted question within their allotted time. They will be asked to stop if they don't. The chair will intervene if the candidates or speakers make offensive or illegal comments. Extreme or repeated offences will result in candidates or speakers being asked to leave. We're hopeful that that's not going to happen. We seem like a nice bunch today. The co-chair's decision is final. If we run out of time, audience can write questions in the chat box feature, and X by X campaigns worker will send these questions to candidates and will post their responses on the X by X website. So with regards to the questions from the floor, use the chat box feature to submit any questions you might have. We have 3 spaces for questions from the floor. These are in section 1 and in section 2. It is down to the co-chair's discretion which question we go with and whether we have time for any more questions. Thank you to all the candidates who have attended today. We have had apologies from the Conservative Party. I'm just going to read out. So when we invited the Conservative Party from Bromley and Chislehurst Conservative Party, they responded saying, "Dear Experts by Experience, as this is a local council election and we have 58 candidates across the borough, as such, we do not necessarily have one unified position on most issues, and it is not fair to put one person forward to speak on behalf of all 58 candidates. Thank you for the invite, and I can only speak for the Bromley and Chislehurst Association, but we won't be able to put forward someone for the Hustings. Kind regards, Sean Slater, Chairman of Bromley and Chislehurst Conservative Association. Okay, so a little bit of a reminder about how this is all going to work. Each candidate has 1 minute to introduce themselves. We'll go in alphabetical order of the candidate's first name. So this is Julie Ireland, Kevin Kennedy Brooks, and Rosheen Robertson. And this will be rotated for each topic. We have 4 sections for the Hustings, which will be covering co-production with deaf and disabled people, independent living and social care, and local services for disabled people and access. There will be 1 to 2 questions that were set or submitted in advance, and there'll be 1 to 2 questions from the floor. All questions will be asked, and candidates have 3 minutes to answer all 3 questions. Right. So I'm now going to hand over to the candidates, and they are each going to have 1 minute to introduce themselves. And we will be starting with Julie Ireland.
Hi, I'm Julie Ireland. I'm the head of campaigns for Bromley Liberal Democrats. I'm also standing for election in Bromley Town, but I am able to speak for all the candidates for the Liberal Democrats, brackets, unlike the Conservatives, close brackets. I've been a member of the Liberal Democrats for the last 7 years. We work really hard around Bromley, and part of our DNA as Liberal Democrats is wanting to be the voice of the local community, wanting the local community to talk and be represented by councillors, rather than councillors telling the local community what they think they should be doing. And this is so important to have events like this Hustings. I remember last time I came to this, I definitely came away with learning more from you than I think you learned from me. So I'm really here to listen, but obviously very, very happy to answer questions as well. So thank you for inviting me, and I'm looking forward to the event.
Thank you. Over to Kevin Kennedy Brooks.
Hello, everybody. Thank you, Justine, and thank you to everyone involved today in making this event happen. It's a pleasure to be here. My name is Kevin, and I am a Labour councillor in the ward of Pension-Cater, and I also sit on the Adult Care Committee at Council, where I try and get under the skin of the Tories in order to hold them to account on some of the policies that they are making across the borough. I won't go into that quite yet. I am also, since the age of 7, I been diagnosed as somebody with epilepsy. So I am really, really passionate about not only ensuring that there's great services for people with health issues, but also to making sure that people without health issues are at the centre of decision making in the borough. Thank you.
Thank you. Over to Rosheen Robertson. Rosheen, you muted. I'll start from when you unmute.
Right.
Okay.
Hello, my name is Rosheen Robertson, and I would like to thank you for inviting me today, as I hope some of you may remember me from my previous visits. I'm the Green Party candidate for Bickley and Widmore in this election. I am also the election agent for Bromley Green Party and actively encourage our candidates to stand and represent our party in local elections. I have been active in local politics since 2008, I'm a long-time volunteer for various causes and have been an active green activist for more than 30 years. During this time, I supported all the climate change activities which agreed with Green Party policies, as well as those policies which promoted equality in society. Equality in society includes benefits and living arrangements for all. It seems this disabled community has not done as well as other sections, and I would seek to change that.
Thank you, Rosheen.
Thank you.
I'm now going to hand over to my co-chair to introduce the first section.
Okay, the first section is co-production with deaf and disabled people's organisations. We'll be taking the set questions from the Bromley Mobility Forum. The first question is from Georgina.
Okay. And Georgina, if you unmute yourself. Georgina, are you able to unmute yourself?
Mute.
There we go.
Now, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Would you
Sorry
like
about
to
that.
your
I had a
question?
bit of a problem logging in.
That's okay.
Um,
Are you able to read
happening?
your question?
I'm sorry?
Are you able to read your question?
Oh, yes, sorry about that. Right. Have a slight problem because I'm partially sighted. As our local council, what steps will you and your political parties take to ensure that local planning licensing and other decision making forms, etc., takes into account the needs and views of local deaf and blind and disabled people?
And now we're going to go to, oh, sorry, Phoenix. And do you want to announce the next person who's reading a question?
Question 2 will be coming from Ravina Sutton. Did you hear me, or do I need to sort out my internet?
I think Ravina was just entering the panel.
Okay. Okay,
Ravina?
just checking it was not.
Why can't I do this?
That's okay.
Hello there, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you to the panelists for attending, and I'm disappointed that the Tories couldn't come. My question is, of all your party's candidates for the Bromley Council elections next week, how many are deaf and disabled people, please? Thank you.
Right. So regarding questions from the floor, I'm just seeing if we have any. From what I can see, there aren't any. So what I suggest we do is that we move on, and if any other questions come up, then we could just. Oh. So we're gonna move on. So I'm gonna allow candidates 2 minutes to answer those 2 questions, and then we'll, if we have any questions come up in the next section, we will take another question from the floor then. I'll hand back to Phoenix for the next bit.
Mind. So the first candidate to speak would be Kevin Kennedy Brooks.
You're muted, Kevin. We'll start timing. Yep, we'll time from then.
Okay, thank you very much. I tell you what, I will take the second question first. That could be okay. Would that be right? So the easy question to that is actually I don't know, because obviously, as we know, many disabilities are hidden, and I wouldn't know how many people, unless they told me, would have a disability. However, I do know I do. So I can say at least one. I'm in the current group as a Labour councillor. I'm in a current group of 8 of us, and I am the disability officer of the group. I've, as I said previously, I have epilepsy, so I know I have, and therefore it's something that's very important to me. I do think, however, that there is a lot of work to be done in terms of making it something that is attractive to people. Especially at the moment, we have gone back to not being able to have meetings online and things like that. I think we're just setting up barriers rather than bringing them down to allow more people with health issues to get involved. So I think that's something we seriously need to look at. We do encourage people to be active, and there's lots of activists within the party, but I'm afraid I couldn't give an exact number out of the 58. So on that, in terms of the local council and what steps it will take to ensure planning and other forums are included for deaf, blind and disabled people. One of the things that Labour would commit to would currently the way the Tories hand out the contracts are they base it on 40% value and 60% on price. So that means when they look at contracts, their priority is always on saving money. What happens because of this is it forces out the smaller organisations with perhaps more expertise and more lived-in experience.
Sorry, Kevin, running over.
Sorry, running over. So
yep.
we would put it to 50-50.
Okay.
To allow more in.
Okay.
Okay, the next candidate will be Rosheen Robertson.
You're muted, Rosheen. We'll start from when you're
okay. Sorry. I'll answer the second question first. We do in fact have one disabled candidate, Heather Wallace-Brown. She is representing Plaistow, and she does have a disability. So we know that we have one person like that. In terms of what can be done about how the council provides help and care, especially when we're talking about looking at building, perhaps looking at providing homes in other situations. I think that Bromley Council needs to take effect and to introduce that at least some of the social housing that eventually gets put into plans should be specifically for wheelchair owners. As far as I'm aware, and I'm not particularly aware, but as far as I'm aware, none of the housing blocks that are proposed for Bromley Town Centre, for example, actually would be suitable. I think there's a MAT something +4 or something. I think that's incredible that Bromley Council hasn't considered that, especially since, as we know, statistics say that there are more people who are disabled because of accident than because of features of birth. So anyone could become a disabled person and disappear into a wheelchair. And that's one reason why I always support, or have always supported, any actions that disabled people have taken. Was I not long enough?
No, that was perfect. Thank you.
Okay.
We're going to hand over to Julie.
Hi, doing it in reverse order. I'll answer Rabina's question first. Alan Tweddle is a candidate in Farnborough and Crofton. He was also our candidate for Orpington in the general election. I think a lot of people know him anyway. He's completely blind and walks around Orpington with a guide dog. We also have at least 3 other candidates with physical disabilities, and we have several who've got self-acknowledged other forms of disability. We've also got parents of disabled children standing, and in fact the Lib Dem leader, I know he's not standing in Bromley, but Ed Davey is well known for the fact that he's got a disabled child that he looks after. Enough about that. And then Georgina's question about the planning. I went to the open meeting about the Electoral development in Orpington, and I listened to, it's Paula Peters, I'm sorry if I've got the name wrong, and she was really moving, and she spoke so well about the lack of consideration in all the planning for the Electoral development for people with disabilities in so many different ways. And made the point that most of these plans are completely against the Equalities Act. Whenever planning considerations are put before the council, they have this whole list of people who have you consulted, the ward councillors, have you talked to neighbours, have you done this? To me, it's an absolute minimum that there should be a formal consultation with groups representing people with impaired with disabilities. But in any case, the legislation's there also to protect your interest, and it's just being overridden.
Thank you very much. Okay, right, we're going to move on to the next topic, which is independent living and social care. The first person to read out a question is Sue Rogers. We then have 2 questions, 2 to 3 questions from the floor. So we will get, just going to make sure that Sue is moved across. Thank you. So Sue, if you would like to read out your question.
Yes, hello everybody. Disabled people have additional costs with their disability. For example, maintenance costs for wheelchairs, equipment, aids, and costs for taxis to get out and about. This doesn't seem to take into account with many disabled people with high support needs having to pay extortionate costs towards their social care costs, paying up to £200 per week. With the cost of living increases, some are unable to make their social care payments, and as a result are finding themselves falling into accumulating debt with the threat of debt collectors going without food or unable to heat their homes. This is having a negative effect on their overall quality of life. Will the candidates commit to scrapping social care charges for disabled people and supporting the campaign for a fully funded social care system paid for and by general taxation, free at the point of need?
Thank you. Thank you so much, Sue. We're also going to go to the floor. I can't see any. Let me check. So So I can't see any questions from the floor. I do see that Rabina has her hand up. Rabina, is it a question? Yeah, Rabina.
I just wanted to clarify. So the Lib Dems said that a fair number of theirs were, but the Labour Party person said that they don't know. Do people not declare when they stand as a candidate? So we know their gender, we would know their ethnicity, we perhaps can physically tell their age. I appreciate you can't see all impairments and disability. You certainly couldn't see a deaf person. Do they not monitor that data? And this follow-up to that really is, would they consider something like an all-women shortlist or something to bring up the numbers of unrepresented? The phrase "nothing about us without us" is so critical in legislation making and policy making, and that's what councillors do, isn't it? Thank you.
Thank you, Rabina. Okay.
No, don't want me to come back.
Sorry.
Maybe you don't want me to come back on that.
Yeah, so I just wanted one more question from the floor. I'm just checking if anybody is able to read a question from the floor. Who have we lost? Oh, I'm not quite sure. Okay. What I'm going to do is I'm going to let the candidates answer those two questions. So you have 2 minutes to answer the question about social care charging and Rabina's question about whether people declare that they're disabled when they stand. The first person to read out to answer is Rosheen. You're muted, Rosheen.
On the first question, I do understand the costs, and I rather object to the way that it's written in the DWP, that disabled people are given extra money for costs. But when I looked at the amount that they're given, it seems that that's roughly about the same amount as I get as a pension. And I don't consider that I get any extra cost for anything. I do also have to claim pension credit. So I do understand the costs. And of course, the cost of living, I've had an exchange with my electricity supplier, and I'm now paying an awful lot of money for 15 months, just so that I can retain the bill with them rather than outsourcing it, which is what they asked me to do. Basically, they said you can pay back the money that you want to cover your costs, but if you want to pay back the amount that you now owe, you're going to have to take out a loan. I found that confusing, and also I got some help from one of my sons. So I do understand the special strains that this puts, especially on disabled people who maybe are not able to understand things perhaps as clearly as I can. You know, it takes me a while, but I get there. On the supplying the social care charges, I would agree with upping that. And I do think that, what was the other thing? Yes, all social care should be funded by general taxes. General taxation, as the NHS was planned to be so established. When we're talking about, very quickly, a short list of women, I think the Green Party has discussed this, and I think they said no, it wasn't a good idea. There is no obligation to declare anything apart from not having some sort of criminal past, as far as I'm aware. Obviously, the people who are chosen or selected as candidates are quite well known to the community that they're selected in. So any disabilities would have been discussed probably during a meeting or at some other time. Okay.
Thank you, Rosheen. We're now going to go over to Julie.
Hi. Yeah, on Robina's point, I mentioned Alan Tweddle because I have his permission to say that he's disabled, but that's not why he's a candidate. He's a candidate because he's a true Liberal with a real passion for Orpington, and trying to see improvements in Bromley. So I think it's a dangerous path to start putting labels on people. That's not why he was selected, and why I didn't mention names of other disabled people. I don't have their permission to put that badge on them. So I hope people can understand that. In terms of all women shortlist, Lib Dems have done that. We had an unbalanced representative of the genders in Westminster. So we had all women shortlist in some seats, and fortunately we're now, well, in fact, women are in the majority in our MP, so we're now not doing all women shortlist anymore. But I think it's important to say that the people representing us, I think that's a phrase, who is it that Robina said, that nothing about us without us. I think that's really strong. We need to make sure that we represent, we represent who we represent, if you like, so that if there are too many men, if there isn't a voice of young people and old people, ethnicities, disabilities, LGBT plus representation, we need to make sure that we've got the cross section, and if we haven't, then we need to take steps like we did with all women shortlist to correct it. But I hope that you can understand that whole idea about not labelling people specifically without their permission. In terms of extra costs for people with disabilities that Sue mentioned, I mean, honestly, I don't know how some people cope. I mean, you've got a pittance to cover massive costs, and when the costs are covered by the government, the amount of form filling that you have to go to, I mean, it's just incredible. So I absolutely sympathise. People without any kind of special needs are suffering horribly with the cost of living at the moment, and to have that extra layer must be so damaging to your kind of just general peace of mind and mental health. I mean, the Lib Dems supported a fully funded social care system 20 years ago, and what we wanted a cross-party approach, and I think generally people have been in favour of it, but typically it's been politically sidetracked, and now we've got this pretend social care bailout that the Conservatives put in, which most experts say won't even touch the edges of what's needed. It needs a cross-party. We've suggested at various points a kind of a royal commission, and I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Over to Kevin. You're still muted.
Sorry about that. Okay, so in order for the first point, in terms of the costs, it is a disgrace. Really, there's no other word for it. I work in the employment sector, and so I am fully aware of how the benefits have affected people over the last years, whether people have health issues or not. But people with health issues have by far been affected worse. Indeed, the personal independence payment, there are actually targets to fail people applying for it. And one thing that the Labour Party would do is get rid of that and actually have a personal independence payment judged on by the person's doctor who's known them for a considerable amount of time, take their notes taken into account, which at the moment they're not. The other thing that the Labour Party brought a motion into at the council was to keep the £20 uplift that had occurred during the pandemic, not only to keep it onto universal, those who are claiming universal credit, but also to widen that to people on non job searching benefits, so disability living allowance and benefits such as that. So those things we want to do. We don't want to see a slow privatisation through the social care into the NHS. And so I agree with the sentiments and thoughts of the question on that. In terms of the whether you should declare or not, the reason I said no, obviously Bromley is a very big borough. I do not know all the Labour candidates in the borough intimately, I have to say. I have been over to many parts of the borough campaigning with them, but not to everyone. And also not everyone has to say to me whether, you know, they have a health issue or not. And also, as Julie said earlier, really, it's about making. I've always felt with myself, and why I would encourage anyone who feels they would like to or would want to actually, you know, go down and get. Why not, you know, think about becoming a councillor itself, because your disability should not define you. That's the main thing.
Okay, thank you, Kevin.
Welcome back, everybody. We'll be starting with topic 2, which is local. Actually, let me make sure I've got it here. Local services for disabled people. The first 2 questions will be read by Paula Peters, who is an Orpington resident and a DPAC activist.
Good evening, councillors. Thank you to XBX for allowing me to ask these questions. Question 1 to all candidates, please. Can candidates please explain why there is no provision for accessible social housing in the O'Reilly Development Plan in Orpington and the Churchill Quarter Development Application Plan in Bromley, that placing assisted living for over 55s in a 12-storey tower block is very inaccessible and concerning, with no personal emergency evacuation plans in place, puts lives at risk in the event of a fire, and can lead to a tragic outcome. What will the councillor candidates do to ensure that accessible housing is incorporated into planning applications, is ground floor no higher than first floor, and each disabled resident has a personal emergency evacuation plan? Thank you. Do you want me to read my second question, Justine?
Yes, please.
The second question is this about street furniture. Street furniture in Bromley is becoming an ever-increasing problem, which causes wheelchair, mobility scooter users and visually impaired people significant problems navigating the high streets and puts safety at risk. What will councillors do to address this ever-increasing problem, and that disabled residents in the borough access needs are taken into account, and that the Equalities Act of 2010 is at the heart of service provision planning applications going forwards? Thank you.
Okay, and
Sorry, there is a third question, I forgot.
Yeah, so Phoenix,
can
do you
put
want
it
to
up
read out
now.
the third one?
Yeah. Question. Let's see if this is not doing what it's told. Question 3 is from the Youth Transition, young people from the Youth Transition Forum. There is not a lot of support and guidance in Bromley for young people regarding transition from children's to adult services. It's it can be very scary for a young person. Sorry, it can be very scary as a disabled young person in Bromley. What will you be doing to assist a smoother transition?
And I'm just wondering if we need to repeat that question just because you broke up a little bit. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to read the question again, if that's okay with everyone. So the question was, there is not a lot of support and guidance in Bromley for young people regarding transition from child to adult services. It can be very scary as a disabled young person in Bromley. What will you be doing to assist a smoother transition? I'll hand back to Phoenix.
So the first candidate, Julie, please go first.
Just a reminder, you have 3 minutes. So
Thank you. You might have to cut me off because I've got a lot to say on those topics. Thank you to Paula. It's nice to see her here. I mentioned earlier that I'd seen her talk at the public meeting on the Electoral development, and she was, well, convincing, not that I needed convincing, but also very moving in the speech that she gave. And I am 100% opposed to the Electoral development. It's obscene, absurd, and strange in many ways, and the so-called Churchill Quarter development opposite the Churchill Theatre in Bromley, I've been opposing that since I started with the Lib Dems back in 2015. I mean, that is ridiculous. Neither development fulfills any needs of the residents. It's just importing new residents, possibly kind of largely investment properties, into our town centres without any concern of what the residents actually need. Paula made some really good points at the meeting all about the lack of access to the swimming pool, which, you know, to me has to be a priority consideration, that there's access for all parts of our community to these kind of leisure facilities. Any Lib Dems that are elected on the 5th of May will stand against the Churchill Quarter development, which I want to remind everybody is a conservative inspired development. There's no developer whipping them into shape. It's their own project. They're buying the land by compulsory purchase order. They've hired the developer. So they're actually scrutinising their own development, which is wrong anyway, even if the development was, you know, the best thing we'd ever seen. So we'll be opposing the Churchill Quarter, and we'll be opposing the Electoral development. And I do think that, you know, it's a bare minimum that the interests of disabled residents should be considered in any planning application, as so many other interest groups are addressed. It should just be the norm, you know, that you know, a focus group of disabled residents, local residents, are consulted. The amount of consultation that's gone on for the Electoral development is, I mean, it frustrates me beyond being frustrated. You know, asking leading questions that, you know, get them the right answer does not a consultation make. So I hope you feel reassured on that. It makes me very angry, to be honest, to see what's been going on there. Yes, I agree that the Equalities Act is there to protect all of us. And to just brush it to one side and pretend it doesn't exist when planning these monstrosities is something that we're just not going to stand for. Street furniture, I have to say that we have been approached several times over the last year, although we don't actually currently have any Lib Dem councillors. We do still get quite a lot of casework about the removal of street furniture. Some benches have been removed, and some people with limited mobility have approached us and said that by removing the benches actually makes the high street less accessible, because they, you know, they need, like on Bromley South Station, they've moved some of the benches off Bromley South Station, and that is a real problem. So I don't think there's easy answers to that, but I think that what we're saying is that you make sure that the interests of disabled people are protected and consulted, but we're conscious that what might make life easier for one group of people with special requirements might make it more difficult for other people. And I think the benches is a really classic thing. Sorry, I'm wittering too much. The transition from from children's services to adult services, that isn't something I'd thought about for the disabled group, and I want to thank you for highlighting it. We championed the extension of the age range for the transition of children in care from to adult social services. So they've now got this buffer zone of going up to 25, so they can stay with foster parents, etc. I definitely think that there's an argument for looking at a transition period, but honestly, I thank you for highlighting that. It's definitely something I'll look into.
Thank you, Julie. Going to go across to Kevin. You're muted.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the questions. So if I go to the first one, I think that if you have any significant planning application, then absolutely there should be part of that planning application should be done really in consultation with people who will have access needs to living in Bromley. However, unfortunately, in my experience, in the last few years in Bromley, planning has really gone downhill. There's just been a major national planning consultation, which is trying to actually make it a lot easier for developers just to do what they want and put anything through, really, just to make it a lot more easier for them. And it is quite difficult at the council to actually get things rejected because you have to do it on a planning law, and of course that's the only way that something can be rejected. So it's interesting that Paula, I think, said there was some legal things going on there, because if that was the case, or that's Julie said, she said, so if that is the case, obviously, well then that is a different matter. But I've come across, and it's so frustrating, the difference between realizing that something's wrong and it should be done in a certain way, and actually what the law allows. So if you do get in as a candidate and you do go onto a planning committee, while it is a very good experience, it can be very frustrating. But I would suggest that with especially any large application, there should be consultation, and there should be incorporation of houses which are accessible, in order that the entire community is reflected within that application. In terms of street furniture is something that we've received from casework in Penge as councillors, especially people, a couple of residents who are blind, and saying that actually the parking, the signs to a parking zone were something that were in their way, and it was cluttering up the street. So, and also the other thing that we've seen, and we've talked to the council about removing in order to help that, is also telephone boxes. There's a number of things that we're wanting to do on the high street. I can't, unfortunately, with 3 minutes, I can't go into all of them now, even though I'd want to. But it's having a number of champions down the high street for people with different health issues. But that's one. In terms of the transition between children and adult, the Labour Party did trying to bring in for people moving in to live on their own. from care to not have to pay council tax as something to support them financially. And also to what we would do is we would make sure that Bromley Well were actively involved because there's a lot of support structure there that they could.
Thank you. Yeah, out of time. Over to Rosheen. You're muted.
Just going on to the first part of the question, I think I did bring this up in my previous answer about the measurements for disabled people. It's M4(3) standard, which have to be implied in the planning applications, and which, you see, when I was a reporter, I would attend planning things from time to time, and there was always for me an outline and then a detailed planning application, and various objections could be made at both. Now we just have a detailed planning application, which is, you know, full of details about this and that and the other and so and so and so and so. And I do think that these new planning laws that are coming up will actually open the gateway, and there will not be as much local involvement as possible. With on the idea of growth in Orpington, there have been objections about the size of the recreation area and the reduction of the swimming pool, which would make it not suitable for European standards or for worldwide standards of swimming. So there is within the Green Party various thoughts about it. Mostly that it would be rather large and unsupported. And obviously, again, we would have to check to see if they had these planning applications for disability access. Again, that goes forward also for the Churchill development, which the Green Party has. Well, we've objected to it ever since it was first mooted. It's much too high. It takes over that whole corner there, and really, as has been said, is not suitable for the needs of people who live in Bromley. People who, I have 4 sons and none of them live here, possibly because they can't afford it, but also because they could find somewhere else to live, and it would be rather nice if they did live in the same town as I do. If we're going on to what's this? Yes, street furniture. The only instance of badly placed street furniture that I can quote was when I went out with a disabled person in their wheelchair to transfer from the place in Penge to Bromley. And we came across the road, which lies next to the old Bromley Council building. And he said to me, "Is that a gap or is that a step?" And when I looked, I saw that the no entry sign was actually covering the light that was shining on the junction. And I could understand his despair. So there may be somebody in the council who would like to go around and mention all the street furniture that they think are maybe now obstructed. I know that there's some other sign somewhere else. In terms of moving from child to adult support, I would have thought that Bromley would have already had a particular person appointed for this. I do know a young person who was in care, who left at 16, left care at 16, was handed some papers, you know, of addresses, and decided that she didn't want to go into the DSS or DWP hostel, so took off for a couple of years. There was no one to look after her. There was no one from the care section looking after her. And she eventually found herself, she sorted herself out and got herself into a proper home and everything else. But there needs to be that sort of guidance. We have such a distracted society now, you know, divorce rates, family breakups, whatever. Sorry, we need a definite child to adult placement officer, I think.
Okay, thank you. We're now going to We are now going to go to Vicky Pride. She's the chair of Bromley Mental Health Forum, and she's going to ask a question. And then we're going to have questions 2 and 3 from Phoenix. Yep. So we'll start with Vicky.
What do you and your party intend to do about the current mental health crisis? Do you have any plans to reduce the unacceptable waiting times and or to improve the way that patients with mental health problems are triaged?
Just waiting for the captioner to catch up.
Hi everybody, so let me just see if I can pull the question out.
Phoenix, did you want me to read it because of your internet? Okay. So I'm going to go on to the questions. Questions. So Phoenix was going to read questions on behalf of young disabled residents. So this one says, I volunteer and would like to go into paid work, paid employment, but there is a 12-week delay in getting access to work and lack of entry-level job opportunities for disabled young people. How will you support disabled young people around employment? And then the final question for this section says, for young, I go to mainstream school. As a disabled person, I have been discriminated against by other students. How will you ensure this doesn't continue to happen for disabled young people within mainstream education? Okay. So we're going to hand over to the candidates, and you have 3 minutes to answer all questions. We're going to start with Kevin. Okay.
Thank you very much. So on the first question about the crisis in mental health, I actually worked for Mind and I saw that at first hand, the incredible amount of people who on the waiting list for support. And it wasn't a lack of anyone working hard throughout Octalease or anything like that, which is our mental health service or CAMS. It is simply a case of we do not have the staff, and our borough does not attract. We have to make sure, and if that's by raising the money, then so be it, but we have to make sure we are attractive as other boroughs for nurses, social workers, community nurses to come into our borough and to support our residents, so that we are not on a long list of our residents, not on a long waiting list. For the other two questions, part of it, I would say, is actually the same. Having worked as an employment advisor within supporting people with health issues into sustainable employment, the delay in access to work is something that really needs to be changed. I mean, that's just an absolute standard necessary thing for people who are looking to get into employment. One of the things I would do, however, would be to have a more open and a more educatory with employers themselves to and therefore to make some reasonable adjustments, and whether that's needed to offer you a job and keep that job open for a few weeks, access to what starts, that might be something that could be done. Similarly, in education, I think it really comes to it comes to education of teachers, parents, children. No one should have to, and especially a child should have to go through that. It's for, you know, whether it's for disability or any other characteristic, it should be something that's not in Bromley schools. And I think that in order to do that, there needs to be education around people's alternative lives. And the important thing in both education and employment is that it's something, again, that barriers that you have are something beside you. But the point to always look at is what you can do, and that is the things to be highlighted in both gaining, overcoming barriers and gaining employment.
Thank you, Kevin. We're going to now hand over to Rosheen to go through a minute.
Well, the first question, what do... I'm afraid I don't know anything about the triage system, but knowing about triage systems in general, it probably doesn't actually suit the needs of the people who are there. I'm sorry if I've misunderstood that, but I'm thinking a bit more in a medicinal or hospital situation. When you're talking about mental health, I do have a friend who works in a local mental health situation. She was almost going to be sacked about 4 or 5 years ago, and then she got the new job, and I understand since then that the mental health provision has actually increased. However, I was quite surprised at one time to find out that there was no youth person, mental health person to help them at all until one got to the Kent borders. And I had a visit to the centre a few years ago, only to find that half the places were empty because there weren't the correct sort of people to go there. And I thought, well, this must be very difficult for someone with mental health problems to be able to actually access any services that there were. I do hope that the situation has got better since my visit there about 5 years ago. When you're volunteering for something, you must remember that you're also learning good skills. Whatever your volunteering role is, teamwork is a good skill to learn for any employment. Initiating things, suggesting a banner or doing something creative like that is part of teamwork. Your skills will be appreciated. I think people tend to think, oh, well, I'm no good because I'm no good at, I don't know, typing, or I'm no good at English, or I'm no good at something. And really, any volunteer work that you get into, you can actually list the skills that you will have by the time you've finished it. Timekeeping is a good thing to note. And that will open up your eyes to employment that is out there. There is employment out there. It's a question of you having a look and seriously working out what you are doing about it and where you can see your future. And on the discrimination at schools, I think you've just got to be brave. People are like that. I think that I know that attitudes have changed in my lifetime, and I'm certain that attitudes will change in your lifetime. And really, you can't get angry at people. You can only have compassion for them that they don't understand, because at some time, maybe they will have to. Thank you.
Thank you. Now over to Julie.
Thanks for that. This is such a difficult issue. I think back in 2018, the Lib Dems started campaigning for mental health to be given equal priority in the health system as physical health. I think people are coming closer to us for agreeing with that. But for so many years, the mental health part of our health service has been kind of the poor relation. I have a close relative who works with teenagers who are suffering with mental health issues, and they told me that there's now a 2-year waiting list from a first referral for teenagers who need help with their mental health. I mean, it's a death sentence for some kids, and people who are working in the mental health field facing that. I mean, it must be destroying for them to know how little they can do. The terrible answer is that it comes down to money, but it also comes down to priority. I'm sure a lot of you are aware of this big change that's happening in the health service from the 1st of July, the integrated care system. I know that that's going to be a bit chaotic for a lot of people, but there are promises within that new way of looking that given that it is an integrated care system, that there will be wraparound care. Because quite often people don't just present with a mental health problem or a physical health problem. Quite often it's a social problem. It's problems with their school, like the other questioner talked about, problems with finances, problems with their housing. So you're kind of looking at a kind of a wraparound care system. Obviously, it's chronically underfunded, as all these new schemes are. But I do have some hope that, it's the way forward. And I think all three main parties have supported the integrated care strategy, which comes into effect. I think it's on the 1st of July, but I believe the Act hasn't actually gone through Parliament yet. Any minute now, I think, is the answer to that. I'm really sorry to hear about the bullying. That's completely unacceptable. I'm appalled to hear that. And I really do hope that the school steps in and helps. That must be such a hard thing to have to face. We, as Rosheen said, we know that children do bully, but it's down to the school to show good leadership in these instances. And in terms of employment, I do think it's down to the local council to make special facilities available for ensuring that they are offering employment opportunities to, as you say, disabled people who are leaving the voluntary sector, who've got good and valuable skills, and without an actual paid job on their CV, find it very hard to step into paid employment. So I would look to the council to make special efforts in that respect. Thank you.
Thank you, Julie. So we are running on time, if anything slightly before time. So what I would actually like to do is I would like to ask the questions that have come forward in the chat box. And I would also like to go back to the question about transition, because I felt that all three candidates didn't really get a chance to answer that question. So I'm going to go to Phoenix, if internet allows, and ask the question about the transition from adult to the youth to adult services, please. Okay, Phoenix is having an issue with sound. Do you want to try, Phoenix? Okay, that's fine. What I'm going to do. Oh. Okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to read them out. So I do apologize for the technical difficulties. So first of all, question number 1, when can council increase the number of accessible toilets in public places such as parks? Question number 2, there is no equivalent to access to work for volunteers, which means that volunteering is difficult for disabled people. So what would be done around that, addressing that? And question that we are taking again from the Youth Transition Project. There is not a lot of support and guidance in Bromley for young people regarding transition from children to adult services. It can be scary being, it can be very scary as a disabled young person in Bromley. What will you be doing to assist a smoother transition? Right, so we are going to go to Rosheen, and there is 3 minutes. You're on mute, Rosheen.
Okay, well, as I said, the transition between child and adult, I remember when I was transitioning from, income, was it income support or whatever, some payment before, and then I had to go on to this new one. Must be very scary for people because I was living on benefits at the time with my 4 children. So having a guide to guide me through would have been very good. Unfortunately, I found halfway through the process that their computers didn't work with each other. I'm hoping that Bromley Council has got all their systems working together, because that was just dreadful at the time. However, we do know that young people are lost and lonely. They may not appear so, they may be naughty, they may be messing about, whatever, but when they are actually faced with the actual adult world and all the responsibilities, most of them who've been living in care haven't actually had a dad who went out to work, or a mum and dad who went out to work, or in fact anybody who went out to work. So they haven't got that traditional local patterning in their heads as to how one should act, and trying to sort oneself out, find somewhere to live, and get a job, I would be almost impossible for them. So I do think that we need something to help young people in that way. There's no access to work because of the lack of access, and I would bring up the fact that Bromley South has now got a lift, but Bickley Station hasn't got a lift. Shortland Station hasn't got a lift. So if you're asking young people to volunteer, are you providing the right sort of services that they need? Access services may be important for some. I don't know, there could be all sorts of things that employers could do if they looked creatively at the situations they could offer. As I said before, any voluntary work that anyone does always leads to skills that they may not know that they have. So I always would encourage that. However, that's not very good if you're actually trying to get a job. And the third one. Sorry, could you repeat the third question?
It was about accessible toilets in public places.
Yes. Well, being a slightly older person, I do sometimes have to go to the loo very quickly. And to my despair, there don't seem to be any public toilets in Bromley, which means I've got to struggle through a shop to go and ask where the toilets are. There are shops that don't have lifts. There are shops that do have toilets, and they don't mind people walking through. But I do think that supplying public toilets was only a matter of health, back in the day when people didn't actually have maybe toilets in their own homes. And I don't understand why Bromley Council has reduced the number of toilets which are needed by all sorts of people, young mothers with babies, older people, well, anyone who needs to use these facilities. I think it's rather silly that Bromley Council has cut back on that simply to build something like the Churchill blocks that they're planning to do.
Thank you, Rosheen. We're going to go to Kevin now.
Thank you very much, and thank you once again for the questions. On terms of accessible toilets, of course, we have the community toilet scheme now, but I do think there are two things wrong with the community toilet scheme. The first one is, which is perhaps the most important one, is that often the community toilet scheme is not advertised, so you can easily walk down a high street without actually seeing any signs at all where which shops are taking part in the community toilet scheme. The second thing is that there's no real monitoring of how accessible, it's accessible and accessible, but how accessible the community toilets are. Because I think when it comes to use of people who have disabilities, then it's not just a case of having a larger toilet. You need to have rails, you need to have changing facilities, you need to have all kinds of things. So there needs to be a monitoring also of the what the toilets provide themselves, and there needs to be advertising on that. In terms of the volunteering with access to work, I mean, the simple answer, of course, but it's not one that the government are going to do because the money is to change those rules, that it does go into volunteering. The alternative that I would think of and I would look to work towards is you can work with what they call business improvement districts, which are the businesses in the area. They all give a portion of their money into a big pot, and that can get spent on several things. That, for instance, a proportion of that money could go towards paying for apprentices for people with disabilities and the equipment that it would need for those people to carry out work to the best of their abilities and show the potential that they have. In terms of the last point, I would say what we really need to do is set up a closer connection between adult care and children education and families, perhaps putting them together with that Bromley Well, Bromley Healthcare, and also early intervention side of Oxley's, and have a separate grouping of candidates from those groups to help ease the transition from being from child to adult.
Thank you so much, Kevin. I do apologise. I think I did my 30 seconds slightly early, but thank you for getting it in there. We're going to go to Julie.
Don't get me started on public toilets. Never does a day go by. We've been canvassing a lot over the last 6 months. I think we worked out that I've spoken to over 1,200 people in about 6.5 months. And never a day goes by when somebody doesn't talk about public toilets. I think that the absence of public toilets in our parks is a scandal. It basically shuts off the parks to a third of the population. Old people, young people, people with disabilities, people who are just old, you know, family groups. If you look at the parks in Bromley, compare it to, say, for example, Beckenham Place Park and how much investment's gone in there and what a popular event it is with the facilities, we are A, missing a trick there for, you know, for increasing the people who are visiting our parks, but B, we're meant to be the greenest borough. We're shutting off that green part of our borough to a significant section of the population. Norman Park, which I go to virtually every day with my dog, 10 years the toilets have been shut there. It's just so wrong. And so much more I could say about public toilets. You know, the community toilet scheme, I think that was, I don't know, that must have been dreamt of in a kind of a drunken moment by somebody, because people who I talk to, even people who don't have accessibility problems, say it's embarrassing. They find it embarrassing to walk into shops and say, where is your community toilet? There's certainly very few are actually accessible toilets. And the very few that are still available, I think the library one is still theoretically available in central Bromley, is permanently locked. It's just not acceptable. And absolutely, public toilets on my top 10 list of things that are going to get sorted. So sorry about that. I get a bit angsty about the public toilet question. Access to work for volunteers. I think we do need to try and think outside the box here, be a bit more creative. I admit I haven't given it a lot of thought. I do know that there's a demand for volunteers. There's a real shortage of volunteers, as there are, you know, there's a lot of shortage of staff to fill a lot of roles in employment. So I do wonder if we can be creative and start thinking about a scheme or a kind of badge scheme or a kind of a marker that companies can use to show that they are open in their attitude towards who they're employing. I definitely think that, you know, that it's not going to be beyond the wit to encourage people to think about, you know, removing some of the obstacles there. And in terms of the youth transition, I think, like I said, like children leaving care, we've managed that, well, not we, but it has been possible to extend the transition period now for children leaving care. So children with disabilities, I would have thought a similar approach with added support would be viable, you know, not to have that cut-off point at 18. And like I said, children leaving care, they've now got until 25 before they move to adult services. So there's definitely, I think, scope for there. But as I said, I've not had a massive thought about this, and I'm really grateful for it being highlighted today. It's definitely something I'll talk to people about. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for answering that. And I would just like to say that regarding the transition stage of adult social care, if any of you do get in, do speak to the Youth Transition Project, because they are a group of young people who are going through the transition, and you would have a lot of insight into the sort of cliff edge that they face in service provision. So make the most of, you know, organizations, especially disabled organizations and the groups, and co-production is really important. I'm going to hand over to Phoenix, and fingers crossed internet allows us to start closing the meeting. Here we go, Phoenix.
Okay. First of all, I would like to thank everyone for bearing with me and my internet. Second of all, I would like to thank the candidates for answering all our questions tonight. And you will now have 3 minutes per candidate to make a closing statement. Rosheen?
No, we get, sorry, I messed up the order, so it's going to be Julie. Who starts?
Right. Thank you again for inviting me along. The message that we've stamped on all the literature that's gone out for the Bromley elections on the 5th of May is that we're working for a fairer, greener and more caring Bromley. And I think the fact that caring as well as fairer are two of the 3 issues that are our main parts of our campaign shows how important, you know, we consider a lot of the issues that we've been talking about today. What annoys me, I think, is that the people of Bromley generally are very they're a very caring community. They step up so much. And I don't think the council properly reflects that. And I think a council should reflect the population that voted them in. I think often back to the early days of the lockdown in the first days of the pandemic, when children weren't going to school, and the children who normally get free school meals, of course, no longer had access to that. And as families of children getting free school meals are necessarily not particularly well off, it was a real struggle. You probably remember Marcus Rashford stepped forward about the same time with this kind of child poverty campaign that he launched. Bromley Council did almost nothing for quite a long time, and what they did do was so kind of reluctant, but a very small charity that I'm not associated with, but I admire hugely, Bromley Brighter Beginnings, put an appeal out so they could give children who normally get free school meals some vouchers, some supermarket vouchers. And I think they raised £15,000 in one weekend, which for a really small charity, just based in Bromley, was just awesome. It really showed how much people care. I set up a couple of mutual aid groups during the pandemic as well. And we had people asking for help and people offering help. And there was always more people offering than asking. It was really, it really underlines what a great community we've got here. And that's why I really want to show that in Bromley, the council should be promoting those feelings. But I could talk for about a long time. I haven't mentioned our campaign for accessible transport, which we're very interested in. We've also haven't talked about some of the education problems and the problems with children who need to get statements. And I suppose the overriding thing is I want a council that reflects the population, that's open and accessible. So the meetings are online all the time. You haven't got to slap all over to the Civic Centre to attend the meetings. I could talk for a long time. I should now shut up. Thank you.
Okay, we're going to go to Kevin. You have 3 minutes to do your closing statement.
Thank you, Justin. Thank you, Phoenix. Thank you for everybody who's been involved in the questions and the listening as well to make this event. I think I'm probably going to go back to Bromley in a week, whether I'm there or not. I'm obviously crossing my fingers, but I think probably it will be a Tory administration again. If I am lucky to return, and if my colleagues are as well, what we'll be doing will be fighting to make sure that adult care is at the centre of what we do. As I've said previously, I do not believe that within adult care contract should be predominated by finances, and so we would change from the 40 valued and 60 finance to a 50-50 level, which keeps financial, keeping the finances in line, but also opening a significant amount of money which can be spent across services. The Labour Party last time, actually due to the campaigning, also reversed respite care, which is also really, really important for people who have health issues. It's never forgetting the people who spend so much time looking after them as well. And the charges for respite care was something that we managed to reverse. And these are the type of things that we were looking for time and time again. The daycare centres and SEN transport are two other huge things, as are direct payments and making sure that people can spend their direct payments on suitable things in terms of being covered on health and safety terms. And we're proposing to have a budget in each ward of £10,000 per ward, which can be used on ward local priorities. And this would be decided by groups, non-political groups within that ward. Councillors will be involved, but it will be decided by bigger resident forums about what those priorities are. And they can include things such as activities for people with health issues or the activities that people already have, making sure that those are receive health and safety monitoring. So one last thing I would just like to say is more important than anything else, though, what we'll do as we go along, we'll work alongside people in our borough who have health issues, because it is from them and them only that we can learn and we can put things into place. And that's what I look forward to doing if I'm successful next week. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kevin. We're going to go over to Rosheen, and you have 3 minutes.
Well, as everyone else, I would like to thank you again for the invitation. It's been very good for me to catch up on various aspects of what happens to disabled people and the issues that they are worried about. They may seem very tiny to us, but I can assure you, when I was walking through Bromley with the disabled person in a wheelchair, we got to the market square and he said, "Oh no, I'm only going to go on this side of the black line." And I said, "Well, what's the matter with the black line?" And he says, "Well, until I know it's not a step, I won't go near it." And I suddenly thought, well, the whole of the market square is you know, it's white stuff with black lines and steps in it. How confusing for someone who possibly has sight issues and also is in a wheelchair. So I do know that there are acute problems, none of which really compare to the latest electricity rises, the cost of electricity and energy, and we see nothing from Bromley Council to offset that. We see no enthusiasm to invest in a wind farm near Biggin Hill or somewhere, or even invest in solar. So we can put pressure on Bromley Council if we are councillors. And of course I would be, if I was elected, the first Green councillor in Bromley Council. And that, of course, we haven't mentioned the green belt, which could be covered in wind farms, I assume. We haven't talked about the viability of wildlife. It's now been declared. The Green Party says that all animals are sentient, and we should be very careful about the local wildlife, which is why we have the green spaces, which is space for other sorts of wildlife to exist without us. So I think if I was a Green councillor, I would certainly be working towards opening things up, having a clear talk about the situation, whatever it is, and having people who are going to respond. I think since the COVID pandemic, we've become more perhaps reliable on the fact that it's caring for the community that matters, not necessarily status or class. And I think that is one of the things that comes through the disabled society, the disabled groups that are around, that it is how you perform to the best of your abilities. And that's what I would do should I be elected.
Thank you so much. So we have reached the end of our Hustings event, and I just wanted to say a massive thank you to my co-chair, Phoenix. Thank you so much for co-chairing this meeting. I'd also like to thank all the candidates for giving up your time and answering all of our questions. I'd like to thank all of the people who read out questions and who put forward questions, those residents who really care about what's going to happen in the future. So thank you to all of them. And again, thank you to all of Experts by Experience staff who made this event possible, and our funders, Trust for London. There are a couple of questions that were submitted that didn't make it into the Hustings event. I will pass those on to the campaigns worker, and she will send them to candidates. If you wouldn't mind giving a written response, that would be great. And then that would be posted on Experts by Experience website. And yeah, I think that's pretty much everything. But thank you so much for your time, and thank you everyone who attended as well. Thank you. And don't forget to vote on the 5th of May. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Goodbye now.
Bye. Thank you so much, Phoenix.
Thank you for allowing me to go, Jeremy.
You did really well, even though your internet was playing up. So
We got some answers. I'll see you guys. Thank you very much.
okay, see you later. Bye.
Shall I end this now?
Yeah, we can. Thank you, Jamie, for all your hard work.
I hope it came across okay. It's some of the, when you put them into from panelists,
Yeah, I
takes a
changed.
bit of time, doesn't it?
Yeah, I and also pulling somebody across as well
Yeah.
from the audience. I think I'd plan that differently in future. Christine in the chat box says well done. Thanks, Christine. Yeah. So Jamie, are you still there?
Oh, I can stop recording now, can't I?
Yes, please.